we can start now. So we'll introduce ourselves, Natalie, and then we'll jump right into the questions.
Okay. So are there people here, or is this recorded and then you send it out? Does it, or how will it?
Both. We have some
Okay.
that have been signing up to watch, and then we're going to record it and post it to YouTube.
Okay.
So my name is Aisha Malone. I am owner and co-founder of Rose Café. Rose Café is a bookstore that I'm trying to bring into the Roseland community to give the community access to literacy resources. One thing I noticed as being an educator for so long and working with different communities, my community lacks some resources. And if it's one thing that I could bring that I hope to feed the culture, I thought it would be a good idea to start introducing the community to books that kind of like resemble us, that kind of speaks to our souls and things, so we could push forward on a positive note. And so Rebecca will kind of introduce herself and what some of the things we've been doing so far in the community.
So hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm the co-founder and creative director at Rose Café. And Aisha and I know each other because we taught together at elementary school in the Ashburn neighborhood. And so far what we've done, we started this journey with Rose Café last summer, and we have collected books and passed out around 5,000 books around the Roseland neighborhood that we have intentionally given out, books that are, good for the community and the people that are in it. And also we've had author talks like these. So we bring together groups of people. I'm from the north side of Chicago. Aisha's from the south side, and we're all about bringing people together to read books and learn from one another and have healthy conversations. So that's what led us here today.
And if you could introduce yourself, Natalie, to our guests.
Hello, everyone. I'm Natalie Moore. I am a reporter at WBEZ, and I am also the author. My most recent book, which is 5 years old now, is The South Side, a portrait of Chicago and American segregation.
So you ready?
Yeah. So just wanted to start off by asking you what your inspiration for the book was and why you decided to write it.
I like to joke that this book was my dissertation for working at WBEZ for almost 10 years at that point. This book is really an extension of the reporting that I had been doing on neighborhoods, urban affairs, housing, economic development. And I felt like whenever I was covering these issues, violence, food insecurity, that all roads were leading back to segregation, but it wasn't something that was really at the forefront for elected officials or public policy makers, outside of academia. They weren't talking about it.
So when we, as we look for authors to talk to, we look for books that kind of like speak to things that are going on. And when we picked up your book and it's like the South Side, I'm like, man, the South Side, I'm from the South Side. Let's see what she's talking about. And then when we get to reading the book, it kind of, for me, you would think that the South Side was Chatham, the Robert Taylor homes, and the Bronzeville community, because you talk about them in depthly. I was wondering, was there ever a point that the title because we didn't get as much knowledge as we did about other prominent neighborhoods on the South Side as we did as the one you kind of grew up in. And was that intentional?
Well, there are I talked about Inglewood a lot. I talked about Beverly. There is some Roseland that's in there also. The South Side is the biggest geographic part of the city, so there's no way one book could get in depth about every neighborhood. But the South Side is also an identity. It's not just a collection of neighborhoods. And in my introduction, I lay out like what it is I am doing, what it is that I'm not doing. So I don't think that it's wrong to call it the South Side, even though it doesn't have every neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to what you were saying earlier about segregation, I wanted to talk a little bit about this quote. So as we're both educators, and in our school that we taught in, was basically 100% Black students. And this quote really struck me that said, integrating schools isn't about getting Black and white children to sit next to each other just for the sake of kumbaya harmony. Diversity is worthy and segregation needs to be broken up because it perpetuates a system of inequity. So I wanted to know what your thoughts were on integration, where maybe necessarily people always talk about integration where, you know, for kids that have the best schooling experience, we all need to be together. But maybe that's not necessarily the case, where it's more focused on resources to the schools that already exist versus integration of races.
One thing that I wasn't trying to do is to paint Black people or Black neighborhoods in a deficit. So I'm not saying that your Black child needs a white student. I'm not saying that your Black neighbor needs a white neighbor. However, the system that we are in is a segregated one. And it's one where I don't think it's good enough just to say we're going to put resources in one place, because it's too systemic. For example, if we look at how banks operate, like you can say, let's put resources in a place like Roseland, but then you're still dealing with banks and their lending practices. You're still dealing with appraisals. You have all these other issues that you're up against. And this is this is something in this country. So it's not they're Black, countries in Africa that don't have to deal with this. It's not because of the skin color. It's because of how this country has dealt with slavery, with Jim Crow, that we are in the position that we are in. And unfortunately, the way resources works, segregation is about lack of resources and lack of proximity to power, which is why I write a lot about how people like to gloss over things by making it a class issue. You could be a 6-figure Black household in a Black neighborhood and still face some of these issues. Now, not as acutely as working class or low income Black folks, but you're still facing issues when it comes to home ownership. You're still facing issues about the amenities in your neighborhood. So there is a shared experience that's there, that regardless of income.
And I'm so glad you said that, because you also talked a lot about the restrictive covenant. And before I had read this, I really kind of didn't know the term. And I was wondering if you can kind of speak a little bit about it in a term, well, like a lot of people can understand it, because I think has a lot to do with it as I continue to read your book.
Yeah, I'm actually working on a project about that right now that I can tell you a little bit about. So let me go back a century. The Great Migration started in 1916. Mm-hmm. And when you had an influx of Black folks from the South coming here, they were contained into the Black Belt, which would be known as Bronzeville. That area kept growing its boundaries because it became overcrowded. In 1919, Red Summer, there were riots all over the United States, race riots. And there was one here in Chicago. And there was a Black boy who swam in the white part of Lake Michigan. And, around 24th Street, give or take. And he was killed. And then there was a riot, and it lasted for days. People were killed, people were injured, homes were lost in fires. And there was tension with African Americans coming back from World War I and wanting jobs, and white ethnics feeling like these Black people were taking them away from them. In 1922, there was a report that was written about the riots, and it said, don't do segregation in housing. This is a recipe for disaster. And Chicago did the exact opposite, as did other cities in the United States. So there were lots of different tools to enforce segregation. And one of them were called racially restrictive covenants, or deeds. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that you had a binding document on a parcel of land, a home, or a subdivision that said you cannot sell or rent to Negroes, have a transfer of land. Sometimes it said, or non-Caucasians, but it was really designed to keep Black people out of Black neighborhoods as the Black population continued to grow in Chicago. So a covenant, and I'll use this example, Lorraine Hansberry in Raisin in the Sun. Her family bought in the White West Woodlawn area in the early 1940s. And the white family said, no, you can't be here. The case went to the Supreme Court. And the Hansberrys won only because not enough white homeowners had signed saying no Blacks allowed. That was a precursor to the 1948 Shelley versus Kramer case that said you cannot enforce these covenants. So covenants, think of covenants as a neighborhood association, right, and the restrictive deeds as a deed to an individual house. So I'm doing research on this now. These old covenants and deeds can be found in the basement of the Cook County Clerk's office, but you have to go through a couple of books to then copy the address. It's a very long process that I will be doing once I'm fully vaccinated. But what we also wanted to do to reckon with this history is to get people to look through their own records. So if your home was bought or sold or built between 1916 and 1948, there's a good chance there was a covenant or a deed attached to it. So I got this from the Chicago History Museum archive. So this is a letter written in 1929, the Auburn Park Business Restriction Association. So restriction tells you what they're about. And they were located at 8217 South Halsted, which is in the next block from Italian Fiesta today. And the Auburn Park District was considered from 74th to 83rd State Street to East Racine. And so this letter that I'm reading from was sent to homeowners there saying that they wanted people to sign a covenant to keep Black people out. And the agreement was drafted by attorneys for the Chicago Real Estate Board. So you had real estate agents who were involved in this. And it's for the purpose, the restriction against the sale to use and occupancy of colored people, which is based upon the decision of the Supreme Court of the United States and is legal, lawful, and binding. So that's referring to another Supreme Court case. And then the letter goes on to say, the Auburn Park Restriction Association was organized by the local bankers, leading businessmen and property owners who felt that this movement was necessary in order to uphold property values. Your cooperation is needed in order to complete this work. Will you kindly sign this agreement, have your signature notarized on the form attached, and return to us? And I have a copy of the form. It's a few pages long, written in legalese, and it costs $5.
So fast forward from that, you talked a lot about in the book about these restrictive covenants. Fast forward to when they were struck down, then talk about the Robert Taylor homes when they were torn down. And this was after restrictive covenants were illegal. Yet when there were so many promises about where people would go with the vouchers they were given after their homes were torn down, and the promises were not upheld. I was wondering what you think in ideal world, what would have happened and what Chicago would look like now if they held up these promises.
I think we have to go back even farther and think about how they were built. So I just gave one example of housing discrimination. When public housing was built, there was a push early on to have integrated housing, including by the man, Robert Taylor, a Black man who was on the CHA board, the Chicago Housing Authority board. He and Elizabeth Wood of the CHA were really knocked down for wanting to have integrated housing. The white aldermen did not want this type of housing. They didn't want Black people in their wards. So what happened is that you had clusters of this public housing built on the State Street corridor. So this is Bronzeville. After the covenants are struck down in 1948, you had a lot of white flight, and then you also had Black people who were able to move into other neighborhoods. So then we have this public housing that's built. So you had, which in the beginning was, I don't want to get into all the history of CHA, but they were seen as a promise, these new high-rise buildings. But you were creating segregated islands on an already segregated footprint. So the fact that they were built where they were because white aldermen didn't want them, I think we have to address that first before we even talk about the promises. The way CHA buildings deteriorated, even though these were people's homes, so much neglect, so much crime, so much unemployment, hyper segregation on top of hyper segregation. So something had to be done, but I think a lot of elected officials, really Mayor Daley, felt like, well, we're just tearing it down. Mm-hmm. And there was something very visual. I'm guessing that I'm a lot older than you all. So, driving down the Dan Ryan, these were, strong images, same with Cabrini. And you can pat yourself on the back and say, look, we tore this down. And so you make that poverty invisible instead of visible. And then there have been lots of lawsuits. Cabrini residents haven't had it as bad, I think. Not that this is a contest, but those lawsuits at Cabrini and Henry Horner said you can't tear down until you have a plan for these residents. And with Robert Taylor and Stateway, they were torn down a lot quicker, and those families were displaced. And we also have seen that there hasn't been replacement housing or a lot of replacement housing that's been built on those footprints.
One of your quotes mentioned, and I love it, the ache of home knows no income or class limitation. And is that my internet?
No, we can hear you.
I can hear you and see you fine.
Everything's good?
Yeah.
Perfect, I'm sorry. So one of my favorite quotes in your book was, the ache of home knows no income or class limitation. And I was wondering, as your family got bigger and as you and your family moved, did that apply to you guys? Like, did you, growing up and knowing the history of Chatham, and you said a little like, I grew up in Chatham, did that ache for you? Was that a difficult, because I'm in a similar situation.
You're breaking up a little bit, but I think I got the gist of your question. I wrote that line probably really thinking about Robert Taylor and thinking, wow, they're going to be really happy to leave. The reputation, the way it looks. And then I realized when I interviewed that last woman in Robert Taylor that was her home. And I thought, wow, somebody like really wealthy could look at where I live, let's say in Bronzeville, and say, this is a tiny condo in the ghetto. How can you live here? So I think that you can always make judgments on how someone lives, and, a home that may seem crappy to you is still home to someone else. And home is an identity. Home is a place where you feel maybe love, connections, a space that is yours, that you have some belonging to. And I think that what I learned, early on, it didn't take me long in my career, is that you have to see the humanity in people and not bring your own biases, no matter what they are, including your class biases, to someone. Now, that doesn't mean I think, well, if she wants to live in this building, nothing should be done to improve it. Like, these conditions were still bad. But I think you can make a distinction between those things. Like, you can describe what's wrong physically with the buildings or the neglect, but while also showing that people wanted to stay in their communities and what they loved about it.
Hence the title, The South Side Home.
Mhm.
This idea of like community and home makes me think about when Aisha and I were talking a lot this past summer. I'm moving, and we're opening up the cafe in Roseland, and we were talking about like, what would it mean for me to move to Roseland? Or like, what would it mean for me to move into a neighborhood that is predominantly Black? Like, what would that look like? And I guess this idea again of segregation, like, where is the line where you want people to be together, but you don't want areas to be gentrified? Like, what do you think about that?
First, let me say is that I think that people should be able to live wherever they want to live, regardless of their race. And I think that there should not be barriers for people to live where they want to live. Over the past 5 years, I've gotten a form of that question from white people pretty consistently. In various ways. Like, I had one person say, I'm renting in Hyde Park with my family. We can't afford to buy here. If I look at where I can actually afford to buy, it would be in Chatham. And I actually think that more people should think like that, regardless of race. And maybe, like, we hear about the same hot neighborhoods. Like, gentrification is not the story of Chicago. It's a story that's happening in Logan Square in Pilsen, but that's not what's happening all over the city. There's no gentrification in Roseland, West Pullman, Garfield Ridge, Chicago Lawn. And there are lots of opportunities to have affordable home ownership in this city, more than we talk about, because we keep focusing on the high-end areas or the areas that are contested. So I just want to give that context first. A white person moving into a neighborhood does not equal gentrification. That's not the definition of gentrification. Gentrification means the displacement of low-income people replaced by higher income people. So Roseland could technically get a whole bunch of white people to move in, and it wouldn't displace anybody because there's so much population loss or vacancy that's been there. So when I had somebody else say, hey, I'm white, we live in West Woodlawn, what does that mean? So the one thing I say is just, it's like very simple home training. Be a good neighbor. Speak to your neighbors. Don't come in with a white savior mentality. Don't start your own organization. They're Black club. There are Black clubs in every Black neighborhood, regardless of income. So I would, if you want to contribute to the neighborhood, listen, don't try to lead, be a volunteer for the organizations that are doing the work. You all are educators. I would say don't ignore the schools. Don't come in to a neighborhood and not consider the public schools, and if you don't send them there, why, think about how you can contribute positively to the neighborhood, support the local businesses, and understand that there's a culture that was on that block or in that neighborhood before you moved in. So if there's, cultural norms that you don't like, and I'm not talking about things that have to do with safety. It's not, I like to give this example. I went to Howard University in Washington, D.C., which now is completely gentrified by the actual definition. Like, it's become much more upper income. It's had some population loss. And I have friends who are alum who own a house, and they have a party at homecoming every year. And so the white people on the listserv have now started saying, we have to do something about homecoming. It's just too loud. I mean, it is crowded. But they could make a choice to say, you know what? It's too much. Let me Airbnb my place out for the weekend. Or I chose to live in a community where there's a historically Black college. Let me expose my kid. Like, let me take them to a football game or to the parade on Saturday morning that has children and not try to erase that. There was someone on the news saying, well, maybe Howard should just move. Like, that is so violent. So newcomers coming in and wanting to change a community, not to improve it, but to fit their lifestyle because they don't like what was there. So those, I mean, that's an extreme example, but it's one that happened. You know, like what if, I mean, this is completely far-fetched, but although someone saying let's stop homecoming is far-fetched too, but like what if a bunch of people, white people moved in and said, you know what, donuts aren't healthy. We should not have old-fashioned donuts in Roseland anymore. Like, stop doing absurd things. Like those are the kind of things that make you a bad neighbor.
And it's convenient that you mentioned like old fashioned in that particular space, because Roseland Hospital is now, they're making that area a medical district. Right. So I also sit on Southwest Invest board where we talk about like some of the programs and stuff that's going on. And they asking the community, like, what could we do with this particular space on Michigan? And one of the options was putting in affordable homes right on Michigan. And because I am a professional in the neighborhood, you know, I do go, you know, to Hyde Park to, you know, socialize a little bit because it's just what I do. And then so they're asking, like, how do I feel about them making affordable homes right on Michigan, knowing they're vacant so much and they can use with what's already there. I'm kind of torn. And I wanted to know, like, how does that look for, you know, when you talk about gentrification by the real definition, right? You got, they're about, you know, this community is about to have different ethnic groups over here more than it's ever been. And they want to put the affordable homes on Michigan. How could that potentially look over here?
You know, I don't know, and I would lean on what the residents want. But what I will say, in 2013, I did a story for Ebony, it was called 48 Hours in Roseland. And I teamed up with the photographer, Carlos Ortiz, and we were literally like 48 hours in Roseland. Like, we would take a nap, like we would be out at 5 a.m, 2 a.m. Like, we were, and the way the story was written is like 1 a.m., you know, what is happening? 4 p.m., what is happening? And we spent a lot of time on Michigan Avenue and walking up and down Michigan and spending more time there versus riding the bus or just driving through. I felt like I saw so much potential. And there are vacancies, but there are small businesses that are there. And I mean, what a walkable community that could be. So I think if I lived there, I would want to see commercial activity. And I know Invest Southwest, you know, is really talked about walkable communities. And I think there's so much potential for walkability there. Yeah, I see a lot of potential, but you need the resources and like not piecemeal investment, but saying we are going to transform this area. Does that mean that housing fits in? I'm not sure, because there's a lot of housing surrounding there. I don't know if housing is the best use on Michigan Avenue. That's just my knee-jerk reaction. But, you know, I would say it's important to have those kind of community meetings to hear what the community wants and what they think fits.
Like maybe a bookstore, cafe, I don't know. I'm
You
just.
know, I mean, I've heard about this Rose Cafe that, you know, what about that? But yeah, I think that that's, I mean, what it is that you all are endeavoring to do goes hand in hand, I think, with what I'm saying. Like, you see a need in the community, you want to contribute to it, and you're not taking away. Like, it's being additive to a place.
I guess just to like wrap things up, for a final question, I'm just curious what your hope is moving forward, looking at the South Side and segregation in Chicago, what your realistic hope is, what you think that the city could look like, and like a dream hope.
Mm. Well, I think about this a lot. I think about what is utopia. My friend Amanda Williams, the visual artist, we collaborate a lot. You know, she says for her, it's children laughing and Donny Hathaway playing in the background. It feels like a Donny Hathaway song. I think it's, as an example, vitality on Michigan Avenue, where people feel safe, they can walk to get something to eat, pick up a book, get a cup of coffee, get on the bus to go to work, grab a donut, any other kinds of services that are needed, and that it's not cut off from the rest of the city. Not a bunch of foreclosures or vacancies. It's a community that's filled. And that could also mean beauty supply stores. Like, there can be some class differences of what people think is acceptable economic activity, but I think everything should be able to thrive. I think if a community wants a cheese shop, it should have it, and the beauty supply store can be next door. I think the best neighborhoods have something for everybody, and there's a mix of people, racially and economically.
The project, and I know she mentioned the last question, but I'm just a little nosy. The project that you was talking about with the Restrictive Covenant that you're talking about, is that like in the book form?
No, it's for WBEZ. And so we're asking people to go through their records to see if they have those deeds from their family. And then we're working with the Newberry Library to preserve them.
Well, we would love to stay in touch.
I'm going to put a link in the chat on it, please, on this.
And we would love to stay involved in things that you have going on, because I like your writing.
Thank you.
I learned so much, Miss Moore, about this. And what we were trying to do is, how Rose Cafe works is, because we are an up-and-coming bookstore, we will love to promote you as a Black author and get more people to buy your book. But we want to show that they can buy it from us. So we want to promote you while, promoting us, like the old system used to be, because more people should know about some of these policies that has interrupted a lot of things on the South Side of Chicago. Because now that we know, maybe, because I know one thing you talked about was Chatham was an exemplar community, because you guys did have the community groups. And so what you did, the other neighborhoods did too. But so from your book, I'm knowing, like, if we can role model what we want, maybe State Street to have it, maybe King Drive will start doing it. And it was only coming from this book that I saw it in there. Like, so I did want to thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for reading. Thank you for the work. Thank you both for the work that you're doing. And thanks for having me.
I'm actually going to a birthday party right now, and this is my present.
Oh, thank you.
Nice meeting you, Ms. Moore. We will we'll be talking to you in your email to give you some follow-up things and to send you a Rose Cafe gift.
Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye.